The pot on Nonna Lucia's stove holds water, a fistful of yellow cornmeal, and salt. In 1933, that was breakfast for a family of 10, crowded into a 4-room house in Providence, Rhode Island, on roughly $1 a week for food. But this morning, more than 90 years later, she's cooking that entire day again, every meal her family survived on, and the receipt for all of it has to stay under $5. By the end, you'll see where every penny went, and you'll see the one meal that makes her stop talking. Lucia was born in 1935 on Federal Hill, in the same 4-room house where her mother, Assunta, was already feeding 8 children. So the worst of the Depression lives in her mother's stories more than in her own memory, but the meals never left. She cooked them as a girl in the 40s, again for her own kids in the 60s, and she can still make every one of them today without a written recipe. Ask her where the recipes are kept, and she taps her temple. Then she taps her hands. The shape of today is simple. 10 servings at every meal, the same number Assunta fed. 3 meals, plus the pot that simmers between them, and everything bought this morning at the market down the street. The receipt has to come in under $5 because a hard number is the only thing that keeps a story like this honest. Her mother managed on far less, even allowing for what $1 was worth back then. Whether the same food can survive contact with a modern grocery bill, that's the question this whole day has to answer. It helps to remember what those years actually looked like from that kitchen window. By the worst of it, roughly 1 American worker in 4 had no job, and in Providence, the textile mills that employed half the neighborhood were going dark 1 floor at a time. Lucia's father queued for day labor at the docks and came home some weeks with nothing but sore feet. And yet the family never once stood in a bread line, and Lucia wants that on the record. Not out of pride alone, out of practice. The Depression didn't teach Assunta to cook this way. Calabria did. She stepped off the boat already fluent in the cooking of people who had nothing. And when the whole country suddenly got poor, her kitchen barely changed. Watch Lucia shop, and you see the same fluency 90 years on. She's at the market by 7, first through the door, heading straight past the packaged aisles to the bulk bins like they owe her money. She runs dried beans through her fingers and listens to them. She smells the cornmeal. She talks the produce man into the celery with the wilted leaves, because the leaves are going in the pot anyway, and wilted is cheaper. 20 minutes, 1 small bag, and we're back in the kitchen before the kettle's cold. Breakfast first. The cornmeal goes into cold water, never boiling, because Assunta believed lumps were a moral failing. Lucia stirs with a wooden spoon, worn flat on one side from 70 years of this exact motion, and for 20 minutes nothing happens except steam, the smell of warm corn slowly filling the kitchen, and an arm that never stops. That's the whole show. Polenta cooks soft enough to pour, ladled into bowls and eaten with a spoon, and on a good week there was a splash of milk over the top for the youngest ones. On the bad weeks, Lucia says, the milkman let her mother run a tab he quietly never collected. The math on this meal barely registers. The cornmeal for all 10 bowls came to about 50 cents from the bulk bin, which means breakfast for an entire family costs less than the lid of whatever you drank in the car this morning. But polenta was the easy one, the meal you could count on. Lunch was built out of something you and I throw away every week. Pancotto, cooked bread, It sounds like a punishment, and it kept half of southern Italy alive for generations before it ever crossed the Atlantic. You take loaves too stale to bite. The ones the baker on Atwell's Avenue sold for pennies at closing time, or sometimes just slid across the counter to women he knew by name, and you simmer them in water with garlic, a bay leaf, and a thread of olive oil until the bread collapses into something between a soup and a porridge. Lucia crushes the garlic under the flat of her knife, and the whole room changes. If there was an egg that week, it went in at the end, whisked to ribbons. 1 egg, 10 bowls. The kid who found a golden strand in his spoon felt like he'd won something, and Lucia swears her brothers fished for it like it was a lake. Watching her make it, you understand the rule that ran the whole kitchen. Nothing left that house as garbage. The bones from a rare Sunday chicken got boiled twice, and a Parmesan rind, on the weeks one existed, went into the pot and stayed there until it surrendered. Waste wasn't a bad habit. Waste was a luxury, and nobody in that house could afford luxuries. But some weeks, even the day-old bread was spoken for, and that's when the family ate what the neighborhood didn't know it was growing. Dandelion greens pulled from the empty lot behind the house before anyone else thought to look, washed in 3 changes of water, because Assunta would rather serve nothing than serve grit. Raw, they're bitter as medicine. Boiled, then fried in oil and garlic, they turn into something Lucia still craves every spring, and today they cost exactly 0, because the lot behind her building still grows them. The backyard worked just as hard. Tomatoes climbed strings up the fence, and beans climbed everything else. And meat? Lucia laughs at the question. Meat was for Christmas and for weddings. What her mother made instead has a name the old neighbors used with a straight face. Sugo finto, fake sauce. An onion and a rib of celery sweated slow in oil, a carrot grated in for sweetness, tomatoes crushed by hand, the pot left to blip away half the day until the whole building smelled like a Sunday ragout, and not 1 gram of meat anywhere in it. The smell was the point. Lucia says her mother wanted the neighbors on the stairs to smell a family that was doing fine. Pride cost nothing, and Assunta bought it in bulk. Was anyone fooled? Probably not. Every apartment on that landing was staging the same performance. That landing ran on its own quiet economy, too. A bowl of beans went up to the widow on the 3rd floor, and a jar of somebody's peppers came down a few days later. When the DeSanto family across the hall lost the father's paycheck, dinners appeared at their door with no note attached. Nobody called it charity. They called it Tuesday. Lucia says the fastest way to insult her mother was to try to thank her. Which brings the day to the meal. Everything else was rationed around. Dinner had 1 job, and it was making 10 people stop being hungry with a pound of dried beans and a few cups of flour. Pasta e fagioli, the way the poorest tables made it, which means the pasta isn't from a box. Lucia mixes flour and warm water, no eggs, works it with the heels of both hands until her rings click against the board, rolls it thin over the same wood her mother used, and cuts it into rough, uneven little strips the old-timers called maltagliati, badly cut. She could make them perfect. She makes them crooked on purpose, partly because that's how her mother's looked, and partly because pasta this rough grabs the broth like it's afraid of drowning. The beans went into water at dawn, and by evening they simmer with a ladle of the fake sauce and the cloudy, starchy water the pasta boiled in. A sprig of rosemary from the coffee can on the windowsill goes in last. It cooks down until the whole thing is thick enough that the spoon stands up and thinks about it. This was the meal that decided whether the week worked, because beans were standing in for meat decades before anyone called that a lifestyle. A pound of them cost $1.29 this morning, and Assunta understood what they were worth to 10 bodies without ever reading a label in her life. Lucia ladles the first 9 bowls fast, talking the whole time, telling me which brother sat where and who once tried to trade his greens for extra pasta and lost the negotiation badly. Then she fills the 10th bowl, and the talking stops. The 10th bowl was Assunta's. Lucia was past 30 before she understood what she had watched every night of her childhood. Her mother served everyone first, waved off her own portion, and said she'd tasted so much while cooking that she was already full. Assaggiando, assaggiando. Some nights her actual dinner was a heel of bread rubbed with garlic, and whatever broth was left clinging to the bottom of the pot. She did it so cheerfully for so many years that 9 children sitting 3 feet away never caught on. Talk to anyone whose family came through those years, and you will hear a version of the same mother. This is the part where Lucia sets the 10th bowl at the empty end of the table and straightens the spoon beside it twice. She doesn't explain it, and nobody watching needs her to. 91 years old, a woman who narrates every sofrito in her sleep, and she goes quiet for a full minute while the pot ticks on the stove behind her. So, the receipt. Cornmeal from the bulk bin, 50 cents. Flour, 60. A pound of dried cannellini, $1.29. 1 can of crushed tomatoes, 99 cents. An onion for 30. A head of garlic for 40. And the sad celery with its leaves, plus 1 carrot for another 50. $4.58, all of it. The greens were free from the lot. The bread came day-old for pennies from a bakery on the hill that still does what the old baker did. And yes, the olive oil and the salt came out of the pantry, which somebody is already typing a comment about. Fair enough. Assunta's oil arrived in a gallon tin from a cousin in the import trade, so let's call the pantry a family tradition and let the comment section fight it out. 10 people fed for a day, $4.58. And there's a twist Assunta never lived to see. A few blocks from the house where she stretched $1 across a week, a restaurant now sells pasta e fagioli for around $17 a bowl, and people wait for tables to get it. The food of families who had nothing became the food everybody wants. Lucia thinks that's the best joke her mother never got to hear. 10 bowls, $4.58, and a mother who fed 9 children for a decade while telling them she wasn't hungry. Lucia never once heard Assunta use the word poor, and 80 years on she remembers that table as abundance. We have more than Assunta ever dreamed of, and we eat standing over the sink. So which of us actually knew how to eat well? If your family carried a dish out of hard times, put its name and its story in the comments, because Lucia reads them. And come back for what she cooks next. The meal Assunta saved 2 years of pennies to serve exactly once. The wedding table. Word count, 2010.